Let's take a look at Wheelock chapter 5. In this chapter, we're looking at the future and imperfect active tenses for first and second conjugation, and some adjectives that have ER forms or forms. So we'll get to that at the end of our time. In chapter 1, we learned the active personal endings and the present active indicative tense for first and second conjugations. In chapter 5, this chapter, we are presented with future and imperfect tenses for those conjugations. So let's remind ourselves what we learned in the first chapter, okay? We want to review the personal endings we learned in chapter 1. And I'll point out here that for the first person singular forms, either O or M are used, but a verb will not use both of those. It'll choose one or the other. All right, so just as a reminder here, we have for first singular, for I is the subject, O or M. For second singular, S for you, and T for he, she, or it is the subject. Mus for we, first plural. Tis for you or y'all, you plural, second plural, and nt, nt for they. And I decided to come up with a mnemonic device for memorizing these endings. And you must, absolutely must memorize these endings if you're going to be successful here in Latin. And then here's my mnemonic device. Most must, isn't it so? Think about this idea of how you must memorize the endings. Most must memorize them. Most must, isn't it so? And the "it's so" is in parentheses because that's actually not part of the endings here. But take a look at what we've got here. The O and the M are what the mo here stands for. That's first singular. Mo, M or O. The S is second singular. That's the S over here. The T is third singular. All right. And then mus is first plural. That's mus over here. The tis is going to cross the word boundary here. That's second plural. And then the nt here is third plural. Okay. So maybe that'll help you. Most must, isn't it so? And you can just divide that up in your head. Now let's get on to the future and imperfect active indicative tenses. Let's start with future tense here. For first and second conjugation, we're going to form the future by adding the tense sign, and another term for that is the tense formative or the tense morpheme, be or be, after the present stem and before the personal endings, which I'll abbreviate with PE. And there is some variation on this tense sign be in the first singular and third plural. We'll take a look at that here in just a moment. Okay, so just as an example, we want to just lay it out schematically here. So present stem, and then we're adding be, and then personal endings after the tense sign for future. Now here's a question that we want to ask ourselves. How do we find the present stem? The present stem is found by going to the second principal part. Remember, laudare is the infinitive. That's the second principal part. And we chop off the re ending, and what's left is the present stem, lauda. And so we're going to use that. If you remember, monere, okay, again, we take monere, the infinitive, drop the re, and what we're left with is the present stem. So we're going to be using lauda with the long A and monet with the long E for our present stem. We're adding be, and then we're adding our personal endings. Now I've chosen the first person plural ending mus here for the first example, lauda plus be plus mus, laudabimus, and that's we will praise. Mus is we, the be is will, lauda is praise. And with moneo, it's mone bitis. Here this is the second plural personal ending. And when we put that together, we get monebitis, and that's you or y'all will advise. And so here is the paradigm of the first conjugation laudo forms and the second conjugation moneo forms and their attendant glosses. So let's just read those together. You can repeat after me. Laudabo, I will or shall praise. Laudabis, you will praise. Laudabit, he, she, or it will praise. Laudabimus, we will or shall praise. Laudabitus, you or y'all will praise. Laudabunt, they will praise. And then looking at moneos forms, monebo, I will or shall advise. Monebis, you will advise. Monebit, he, she, or it will advise. Monebimus, we will or shall advise. Monebitus, you will advise. Monebunt, they will advise. In all of these forms, we have a form of the tense sign for future, be, and then the personal endings added. Notice that with our first singular form, we're using the O form and not the M form for first singular. In the next tense we learn, it's going to use the M form and not the O form. So that's a distinction there. Okay. Which of the forms did we see have the variations on the tense sign be for future? Remember what it is it's the first singular and the third plural use a variation of be. First singular uses bo, and of course that shouldn't be too hard for you to remember since o is one of the first singular endings. But what maybe is a little bit unexpected is the bu form here on the third plural. And I'll mention something here. If it's not bo or boo, it's be. So after the first one and before the last one, everything is be for the tense sign. But maybe this will help you. This is just an observation that I make. If you think about the O and the U sort of going together, in Spanish we have the word pelo, which means hair, and then a place where you can get your hair cut is a peluqueria. Okay? And I just want you to notice that pelo and pelu are both related to the word for hair. Pelo's hair, peluqueria, a place for cutting hair. Notice that we have this alternation between O and U here, just as we have this variation, alternation between O and U as well. So if it's not B, it's O or U. All right? So Wheelock suggests that you practice repeating the sequence. Bo be, be, boo. And that does sound sort of funny, but I do think it's memorable. Bo be, boo. Bo be, boo. Bo be, boo. Okay, so just say that over and over again, and you'll eventually get that. All right. Now, how do we translate the future tense? Generally, use the auxiliary verb will before the English verb. He will praise. All right? He will praise. I will praise. Now, an older grammatical rule in English is that the first person, I or we, uses shall instead of will. So, in an older form of English, we were told it was proper to say I shall praise rather than I will praise, and we shall praise rather than we will praise. But this rule is fading out in our modern English, and so saying I will praise and we will praise is considered acceptable for the first person now. So I will not quibble if you use the will forms there. Okay, now let's look at the imperfect tense. For all conjugations, not just first and second, but for all conjugations, we're going to add the tense sign or the tense formative or morpheme ba with a long A after the present stem but before the personal endings. So future be goes in between, but the imperfect ba goes in between. Now the length of the tense sign ba, that long A, is going to follow the rule that we learned for when long vowels shorten with certain personal endings. And here you may remember that I gave you a mnemonic device, ant and trim, from chapter 1. What does that tell us? Well, anytime I have a long vowel, uh, a long stem vowel, like the long A or the long E on laudare, right? Laudo, and moneo. The if it's followed by a vowel, and so the vowels here in A and I for ant and trim, those represent any vowel. Or if we have an NT or an ND at the end of the word, or if we have T, R, or M after the vowel, then my vowel will be short. Okay, so we're going to shorten the vowel. So in this case, ba with the long A will shorten to ba with the short A. All right, so we're going to see that in our forms. If we don't have one of these sorts of endings following the long vowel, then it'll stay long. Okay, so present stem plus ba with the long A plus personal endings will yield the imperfect tense. So our example here, lauda, using the present stem, plus ba plus mus for first person plural, we get laudabamus. We were praising. Notice this is a past tense form. We were praising. And then mone plus ba plus tis, put it together, monebatis. You or y'all were advising. All right, so let's read the imperfect active indicative forms now. Laudabam, I was praising. Laudabas, you were praising. Laudabat, he, she, or it was praising. Laudabamus, we were praising. Laudabatis, you were praising. Laudabant, they were praising. Notice that you have all the same endings, personal endings, as what you had before with the future, except for first singular, I have the M form instead of the O form. Now, with moneo, we have these forms. You can repeat after me. Moneabam, I was advising. Moneabas, you were advising. Moneabat, he, she, or it was advising. Monebamus, we were advising. Monebatis, you or y'all were advising. Monebant, they were advising. Notice that it's ba 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 all the way through. We don't have any, b, bo, b, boo kind of variation here. It's all b with an a, but there is some variation in the length of the a. Notice that where do we find the shortened version of the a? Okay, before the m, before the t, and before the nt here, right? And that's in keeping with our rule. There's an M here. We have the short A before it, and we have the T, right? There's a short A before that, and then the NT has the short A before it. How are we going to translate the imperfect? The word imperfect itself can give us a clue. The prefix im, which is actually from the prefix in, meaning no or not, as in the word inability, the form of in changes to different forms based on what we're attaching the in to. So immobile becomes immobile, illogical becomes illogical, and imperfect becomes imperfect. So im is really from in, and then perfect means completed. So putting the prefix that negates in front of the word perfect just means not completed. And so the imperfect tense is used to depict actions that are past, but not just past, but past with a particular sort of semantic value. And that is that they're past and in process, repeated, habitual, just beginning, or attempted. All of these are a way of saying that the action is not being construed and presented as complete or completed. Now, most of the time in our class, we're going to render imperfect verbs with the auxiliary verb was or were plus the ing form of the verb, what's often called the present participle. So he is my subject, and then the auxiliary was, and then ing form, praising. He was praising. We were eating, and so forth. However, and this is really important, one mustn't forget that other sorts of non-completed actions in the past can use the Latin imperfect tense. So I could also take the imperfect form that I could translate as he was praising, and I could also translate it in a variety of other ways. He used to praise. He would praise. He was beginning to praise. He began praising. He tried to praise. All right? So, and when I say he would praise, I'm using that in the sense of this was something in the past that was his custom to do. On Fridays, when he was in college, he would play tennis, right? That's the kind of would I'm talking about there. All right, now there are two caveats here on translating the imperfect, and I want to run through these with you real quickly. Now, first of all, if we have an adverb that's being used, and the adverb inherently denotes continuity, and it's used along with an imperfect verb, then best practice is to just translate the imperfect verb with the simple past, because the adverb that denotes continuity will bring out the progressive or continuous nature of it. So some examples here. You've learned saipe, which means often, right? So saipe monebam is I often. I'm going to translate monebam as advised, simple past, simply because I have the adverb often that gives me that progressive or repetitive sense. Okay? I don't really want to translate this as I often was advising. Okay? I often advised gets across the idea that the advising was a habitual sort of activity. Second, I have magister semper laudabat. So the teacher always, and here's my imperfect verb, laudabat, and I'm just going to render it with the simple past here because always also gets across the continuous nature of it. The teacher always praised, as opposed to the redundant sort of translation value of the teacher always was praising. Now, so that's one caveat. Second caveat is this. If the verb denotes a state, this is called a state of verb. And that state can be a variety of sorts: mental state, emotional state, physical state, cognitive state. Then simple past will often be preferable in English to the past progressive form, the ing form, since such verbs are usually not construed as progressive or repetitive. So it'll sound odd to say was blinking as the translation value. And I'll show you what I mean here with two examples. Consider the first example here. I have puellum. Here that M ending is my accusative, so it's the direct object. And amabum is the first singular, I in the imperfect. So I loved the girl. Puellum amabum. I loved the girl. That's a good way to translate it. But you may take the imperfect here with ba and think, I need to translate it with that progressive sense. And then you might then translate it as I was loving the girl. Well, that just sounds odd in English, doesn't it? We want to translate this as I loved the girl, because the verb love in the past tense as an imperfect verb already sort of has inherent within it that it's a state that unfolds in time. And then here we have salveo in the imperfect. Mus for we, okay, but this is an imperfect verb. Salvebamus. And we're going to translate this as we were well. We were well. This is a state of verb. But we don't want to translate it as we were being well, right? Remember, we learned salvere means to be well, right? So we don't want to translate that imperfect as to be being well in the past. We were being well. That's odd sounding. So here I'm just taking the simple past tense as my translation value. Okay, now with students it's a bit difficult to remember, at least up front, the difference between the future and the imperfect tenses in Latin because they're similar. So, what are some aids for remembering this? I've got two things. One was suggested by the Wheelock grammar, and one is something that my sick imagination came up with. All right. So let's think about the future. The tense sign is be, and the imperfect, the tense sign is ba. Now I have blown up the I and the A, along with the helpful thing that was suggested by the grammar. And that is that you're going to translate the future with will, which has an I in it. So notice be and will both have I. Ba and was for the imperfect. He was doing something. Both of these have A. So I've blown up the A for these. And so that by itself might be helpful enough. But here's something that I thought of as well. The first two person number forms are bo and bis. Laudabo, laudabis, right? So bobus sounds like bobus, which is a form of tea that was developed in the 80s. And that's very modern. So for the Romans, certainly this was something way, way, way in the future. Now, on the other hand, the first singular and second singular endings are bam and bas, laudabam, laudabas, right? Bam and bas reminds us of the song La Bamba. Ba-da-ba-la la bamba. And La Bamba is a song that's old from our standpoint, right? That's definitely in the past. So maybe La Bamba makes you think of Bambas, can also remind you of the imperfect, whereas Bobus is a very modern, futuristic sort of thing. I mean, who ever heard of tapioca balls, right? And put in tea. That's going to remind you of the future. Now, the last thing we learn in the lesson is that there are some adjectives in the first and second declension that have er or er forms. Recall that when we were discussing second declension nouns, some masculine nouns end in us, like amicus, which is friend, and some of them end in er, as in puer, boy, or ager, field. All right? So there are some 2-1-2 adjectives. Remember, second, first, second declension. Masculines, 2, feminines, 1, neuters, 2 here for the declension patterns when they're adjectives. There are some adjectives of the 2-1-2 pattern that have er forms, which for the masculine second declension, the nominative singular form ends in er, as in liber, free, instead of us, as in magnus, which is the adjective that means great. Okay, so typically I'm looking for masculine adjectives ending with us in the nominative singular, but I do have some that end with er. All right. Now, sometimes the e, as we've seen with nouns that are er nouns, sometimes the e is retained because it truly is part of the stem. And puer was an example of that among the nouns. Well, that's also true with adjectives. Sometimes that e will stay there because it's part of the stem, and it will show up in the feminine and neuter forms, and in the other cases besides the nominative as well. And then sometimes the e will drop out of the er form because that e was added secondarily to break up a really significant consonant cluster. And so I've given you a chart just with the nominative forms of adjectives following the 2-1-2 pattern, where we see the us form in the masculine, or we see the er form in the masculine nominative singular. But we'll see that with liber, the e is actually part of the stem, so you'll see it in the feminine and the neuter forms, whereas in pulcher, the e is not part of the stem, and that's why it's invisible. You don't see it in the feminine or the neuter forms. It's not that they lost it, it's that the masculine nominative gained it because it needed to break up the form. In fact, if you recall, what we have is this situation. Pulcher was actually the real stem, like with ager is the real stem. Okay? Now, this should have ended, well, originally with us, okay, but that O weakens. So it should have been us. But remember, sometimes the S of the nominative singular case ending is not used, and then in this situation, the stem vowel was also lost, and so I'm left with three consonant sounds: L, the CH, K, and then the R, right? Well, try pronouncing all of that without any vowels. That's really difficult. So this helping vowel E was added to just break the consonant cluster up. Once I add other vowels and case endings, then I'm going to not need that helping vowel because I've got a vowel over here to help pronounce. Pulcra, pulcrum. All right, so let's read these forms just for practice. Okay, so magnus, magna, magnum, liber, libera, liberum. Notice that I'm using the same case endings here with feminine and neuter, but us for magnus, liber though is an er form, not an us form. And then pulcher, pulcra, pulcrum. And again, there's the and the of feminine and neuter, following the typical case endings that we learned for nouns. All right, and then for our nominative plural forms, magni. We'll go ahead and read down liberi, pulcri. The difference between liber and pulcher here in this form is that liber retains the E that's part of the stem. Pulcri never had an E as part of the real stem, and that's why it's missing. Magni, liberi, pulchri. And then neuter. Magna, libera, pulchra. All right. If you want to see the full paradigm, look on page 496 in the Wheelock grammar, and you'll get to see all of the cases for these forms. All right, great.